Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, I'm still beating the mass combat drum. A number of people watched my recent videos in the spirit that they were intended. They took a charitable view of what I was saying, and they were still a little bit uncertain as to how to go about incorporating mass battles into their D&D games. Now, the first thing I'll point out is I think that a lot of the principles that are provided here for mass battle will be equally applicable to lesser forms of the game, such as 3rd edition or even 5th edition. You could use these in Adventure Conquer King, although we already have Domains at War, so that's a different game that has different needs and different rules, and it's built from the ground up with a different set of assumptions. I'm talking about how to use this system presented in AD&D, which, to be fair, is easily ignored. The problems that result from ignoring these rules are difficult to solve by means other than simply playing these rules. So let's take a look at how mass battles work. Some of you guys are miniature wargamers. This is going to be fundamental for you. This is like kindergarten level stuff. You may find this very remedial. This is not generally not a beginner's channel. We game at a high level here. I don't do a whole lot of this kind of level of stuff, but I think it's worthwhile because some of you are role players and you haven't been exposed to 30 years of tabletop miniature wargaming, and you need just this simple walkthrough. So for those of you that are interested, let's take a look at how this works. And in particular, I want to look at how well Advanced Dungeons and Dragons does something that very few games do. It integrates the mass battle with one-on-one skirmish play. Let's talk about terminology here. We have our 4 heroes over here in the upper right, and I'm going to bring in an orc chief and his orc shaman. And then I think we probably, to balance this out, I'm going to go ahead and bring in 2 more orc warriors, and hey, why not a crossbow orc just for kicks? So there is our little scenario. Now, normally in Dungeons and Dragons, you play at the skirmish level. That is, this particular cleric figure represents one cleric, Father Warhammer. This warrior here represents one warrior, Sir Conehead. All right, likewise. This warlord represents one warlord. It's very simple. When you have, and in fact, it's so simple that we can complicate things a little bit, and the game is still enjoyable. Our soldier moves to the front, and he fights with this orc. And to add a little bit of uncertainty, he first has to hit, and then he rolls for damage when he hits to see if he does enough damage to wound or kill this orc. Very simple. You guys are familiar with this. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. But there's another level, and that is the mass battle level. Let's take a look at what that might look like. Now we have a lot more figures on the table, but it's even worse than you realize. Up in the upper right, instead of 4 lone heroes, we have a total of 12 figures. Each one of these spearmen represents 10 spearmen. As you can see, and we'll keep it as simple as possible. Oh, they're wearing some kind of padded leather armor. Let's call it leather armor. It's padded with an undershirt. They do have a sword, and they do have spears, and they do have a shield. Well, that's useful, okay. But this is not one spearman. This now represents 10 spearmen. So as you can see, we've got 2 units of 60. We've got 60 spearmen here and 60 spearmen here. They are opposed by a total of 100 spear orcs. Now, to be fair, I got to point this out because some of you guys get really exercised about this. This particular orc is holding what is probably better termed a polearm. I don't have spears. I'm going to proxy them in. He represents a spear-toting orc. To balance things out, we've got 12 versus 10. We also have 2 figures of orcs holding crossbows. Remember, this figure represents 10 orcs. We have a much larger battle now. Instead of 4 on 5, we have 120 versus 120. But it's not as complex as you might think, because when these come to grips, first of all, let's assume that our 20 crossbowmen, or crossbow orcs, are shooting at this unit. We don't have to roll 20d20. All we have to do is look at our rules as written and say, oh, an orc is a 1-hit die creature. They are attacking figures who have, well, leather armor plus a shield is an AC of 6. What is that to hit roll? Many of you probably already have these memorized. I don't. I had to look it up. 1-hit die creatures attacking AC 6 they require a 13. Now, this is a little outside the bounds of today's discussion, but if you're playing AD&D, it's a simple matter to incorporate the... and again, I had to look it up. I don't have all these tables memorized. There is an armor class adjustment. We're going to call these light crossbows against an armor class of 6. We are at, well, we need to check our range, right? How far away are they? They are, call it 5 inches away. They get a +1 because they're at short range. Against an armor class of 6, crossbows are going to tear through that armor. They get an additional +1. I think, let me check. Light crossbow +1. So they're at a total of +2. Remember, they needed a 13 +2. They just need an 11, so we roll 2 dice. And here's the thing to remember. We got 2 hits out of those crossbows. And for those 2 hits, this hit counts as 10 hits on one of these guys. Well, there's 10 guys. We had 10 bolts strike home. 10 hits eliminates 1 guy. In miniature wargaming, we have multiple ranks because we tend to assume that the guys in back will fill in the gaps. The front gets pin cushioned, the guys in the back fill in, and look at that, it is now a much more even fight. 10 hits on 10 guys eliminates 1 figure at the 1-to-10 ratio. Very simple. However, our second unit now moves up, and things get a little bit more interesting because we have a situation where, and their movement now, again, it's just for illustrative purposes here. Let's assume that we fight these guys race on over to fight these crossbow orcs. All right, and these 6 go to get stuck in against these 10. Now what happens becomes interesting. These guys have, we're going to look at this set in back. You've got 1, 2, 3 figures attacking 2 figures, but our spears have a reach and they can attack in 2 ranks. So we're not just going to roll 3 dice for this attack, we're going to roll 4. And once again, because these guys have 1 hit die, for every hit we roll, we'll eliminate 1 figure. We're going to call our humans level 0. These guys are basic townies, I guess, or basic militia. They're not heroes, they're just regular Joes in line. Level 0 men-at-arms need a 15 to hit an armor class of 6. There is no armor class adjustment for spears versus crossbows. Now bear in mind, because spears have reach, you can fight 2 ranks deep. We're going to get to make a total of 4 attacks against these 2 crossbow orcs. And we get a 17, a 14, and we get a 10 and a, oh, look at that, we got a 20, so that eliminates both of them. All right? Looking down here, we have the same situation. Now here's where things get, one more thing I need to warn you about. What happens, well, we've got a 3-on-3 in the front rank. Do we allow all 10 of these guys to attack all 6 of these guys? Well, sure, this is actually 100 versus 60. And remember that what we're doing here is it's kind of an impressionistic painting, right? This is not exactly, there may be some expansion of the ranks as these guys get closer, depending on how well drilled and how trained they are. Suffice it to say, we're going to be rolling 6 dice versus 10 dice. Now, there may be a situation where, and I happen to have that handy here, I've got 4 orcs armed with axes. Now, these 4 orcs armed with axes made the mistake of being set up in 2 ranks of 2. Now, in this particular combat, only the front rank will be able to attack. The orcs will be rolling 2 attacks versus the humans. The humans will be rolling 6 against the orcs. And that might be the difference between success and failure, particularly if these orcs, let's say, are our warlord's bodyguard. In which case, these guys might have 2 hit dice. Now, when you have multiple hit dice, it's just what it says on the tin. It's how many hits they can take. So while they might be attacking only 2 versus 6 attacks, when our spearmen attack, let's go ahead and roll 6 of them. Remember, it's going to be, we're looking for 15s. They get 1 hit. They get no hits on that one. And they get, no hits. They only got 1 hit. Well, they only did 1 hit die of damage. That's not enough to eliminate a figure. So even though they rolled 6 dice on attacking these guys, they didn't eliminate any figures. You have to roll enough hits to control the hit dice. But what, I hear you say, if we have an even larger threat? What if we have something great and big and terrible, like, say, a dragon. Now, in the case of a dragon, you wouldn't want to have this dragon represent 10 dragons. That's a lot of dragons. Instead, what you do is you say, look, because each of these spearmen represents 10 fighters, our dragon only represents a single dragon. And note how this big dragon is on a much larger base. He covers a lot more real estate. He is a larger threat. This is where we talk about the difference between the figure ratio of 1-to-1 for this guy versus 10-to-1, or maybe even 20-to-1 for these guys. Lone figures, 10-to-1. So in addition to having to worry about the ground scale, we also have to worry about the figure ratio. But before we talk about large creatures, let's talk about what happens in a situation like this. Here is our orc warlord. He is let's call him a 4-hit die monster, shall we? He is going to be using the 4-hit die attack matrix. And if we have a game set up like this, where our unit of 100 spearmen are attacking one warlord, what do you expect would happen? This will work exactly the way you expect it to work. 100 guys are going to slaughter this guy. Some people will say, well, this is a terrible game. No. When you change this ratio, you change the way the game is played. So let's make it a little more even. We're going to circle back around to that in a minute, but let's make this a little more even. We now have a situation where we have one figure that represents 10 spearmen attacking our one 4-hit die warlord chieftain. All right? And in this case, things get even stranger because we're mixing. This guy only does 1 attack per turn. They do 10, but we're rolling a single d20 for these 10 attacks. And we're rolling a single d20 for this guy's 1 attack. They get the first attack. And they're fighting a guy that has a very low armor class. But look at that. Lo and behold, they roll high enough. Oh, a 17 to hit. That means they hit. Oh, we have to take a look at how much damage their weapons do. So we roll a d6. And would you look at that? We rolled 10 guys hit for 2 damage each. That is 20 damage. Now, the way this works is each hit die is equal to 10 hit points. Okay, so if you divide this by 10, you got to do 10 hit points of damage to do 1 hit die. If they were fighting a figure with, a 1-hit die figure, if this was a lone orc with 1 hit die, he's obviously dead from taking 20 points of damage. But what about him? Well, now we have to track wound status. He is down to just 2 hit dice or 2 hit points. Or better yet, you could say, oh, you know what? I know that a 4-hit die orc is going to have, call it 6 times 4, 24 hit points. So he's now down to only 4 hit points worth of damage. That's particularly going to be true for when you are running 4 PCs. You know exactly how many hit points your fighter has. If this was our fighter figure, and he's a 5th level fighter, he's going to have something on the order of, depending on the edition that you're using. If he's rolling d8s for hit points, 5 times 4.5 is going to be 25. Likewise, he will be reduced down. He's only got 5 hit points left because he took that. But now he gets to counterattack, doesn't he? Fine. What we're going to do is we're going to roll his attack, and look at that. He rolled a 19. He's got a really powerful sword, and he does a total of 9 hit points of damage. In this case, the assumption you make is that each of our 0-level mooks, remember, these are cannon fodder. They have 1 hit point each. Each man has 1 hit point, meaning that when we roll our orc's damage, but we don't worry about increments of less than 10. So now our orc attacks, and he does 9 points of damage. Well, normally that would be enough to kill 9 guys, but because they're in a block of troops, because he did not do the full 10 hit points, 1 for each guy, his attack has no effect. In other words, when you are fighting 1 guy versus 10, the 10, you could think of it almost as a saving throw. If you don't do 10 hit points of damage to me, it doesn't take any effect. Likewise, if our orc hits this unit for 11 points of damage. We divide that by 10. Even better yet, let's suppose he's got some kind of a magic weapon, okay? He's got some kind of a horn of blasting. Maybe this is why he allowed himself to be caught in the trap. He is attacking a unit, and he does 35 points of damage because he's got, I don't know, what is it, like a Ring of the Ram or something, some kind of Warhammer of Smiting. This Orc Warlord does 35 points of damage. Well, divide that by 10. He single-handedly slew 3 figures. He's still stuck at 5 hit points. He is about to take a whole bunch of damage. And, well, hold on now. Now we have to kind of adjudicate this. Remember that he's one figure fighting one figure. If you're playing out on a standard grid, one guy can be surrounded by 9, and that's kind of what's happening here. We can't see down to that level of detail. But because we have a second rank of guys who fill in, I would argue this figure is too far away. He can't possibly, his spear can't reach that far. I would also argue this spear is too far away. However, that does still leave our Orc Warlord, or I'm using my fighter again here, that does still leave our Orc Warlord the challenge of, after one attack, he eliminated 3 guys. Now he's got to weather another 5 attacks. We roll the dice 5 times. We can roll for damage, or alternatively, you could just decide, look, I rolled 5 times, and I got a total of 2 hits. That means those 2 hits did, well, if this guy was fighting 10 orcs, and this is how you protect your leader, hey, look, I got to roll for this guy's 2 hit. Oh, he did 10 points of damage. I roll for this guy's 2 hit. He did 10 points of damage. 10 points is enough to kill that orc. It's just that easy. So things do get a little bit strange when you start mixing the 1-to-1 with the 1-to-10, but they're really not that much more complicated than your standard skirmish battle. After all, here we have our 2 units of spearmen, each of which represents 60 guys. And then you have our 3 heroes. This is 5, functionally, this is the same as 5 figures on the side of our heroes, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 figures on the side of our orcs. It really is just that simple. The only thing we've added to the complexity is that we now have a physical representation of hit points. This figure, if you will, this unit of 40 hand weapon armed orcs, if it takes a quarter damage, you can see it instantly. Oh, they're down to 3 guys. And that's very useful because you have to start worrying about morale effects. I shouldn't say you have to start. You should be worrying about this anytime you have combat, particularly for your NPCs. When you are surprised, and I think it's with the first casualty you check morale. I'm not 100% sure about that one. I do know when you hit 50% casualties, this unit has to check morale. And for the loss of a general, you check morale. And that's just an admission that these guys are not mindless automatons. They've got little minds of their own, and they're going to run away at the most inopportune moment. But I think this is probably pretty good for today's video. Oh, geez, I almost forgot. What about this guy? Well, it depends, right? First of all, his breath weapon is going to be a terrifying thing to behold. If he is being attacked by our hero, then the normal rules apply. This is back to the skirmish level, 1-to-1. If he's being attacked by a unit of figures, if he's being hammered by 100 spearmen or 10 figures of spearmen, the same rules that we talked about with our hero apply to our dragon. Good for today's video. The one thing I'll caution you, and this is what my previous video was all about, and a lot of people they're not well grounded enough in both the miniature wargame side of the hobby and the D&D wargame hobby to understand why this is an issue and why this is so revelatory for so many people, and why the subject of spells comes into play. And that is because you have to think. If you have to change the ratio of how spells work in addition. But instead of talking about spells, I want to talk about one thing that people may object to. Listen, my hero is up front, and, well, let me do it this way. My hero is up front, and oh my gosh, he has to weather 20 arrow attacks every single turn. And the answer is, if he's dumb, yes, he will stand right here, and he will weather all of those attacks. You may also have a wall, and he may decide that he's going to position himself along the wall, and he's going to spend half the time behind the wall so he's not subject to line of sight. He's not going to be attacked. He may have to if he decides to charge these guys. If he decides to charge these guys, one guy taking on 40 guys would be dumb. Don't do it. If you find yourself in that position, you've made mistakes that led you to that point. The mistakes came before you get to that problem, okay? We have an archer. So fundamentally, the way this usually breaks down in practice is that our mass units will tee up on each other. Our wizards will target each other. Our archer's in trouble. Maybe our archer targets the leaders of the other side. You know where you find that kind of thing happening? Specialist long-distance guys targeting the leaders. You find that in the real world all the time. Light infantry, snipers targeting the leadership to try and affect that morale break. Oh my God, they killed Sarge. I don't know what to do now, the rest of the guys say, and they run away. This is the game working as intended. Use these guys as a screen. Bring them up first. Now, these crossbowmen can't shoot at our heroes. Put our heroes with this unit. Oh, well, if our crossbowmen attack this unit and do 2 casualties, did they hit this guy? The general default is, well, our heroes have a touch of plot armor. They will always be the last to die. That's a reasonable assumption. That gives our hero the opportunity to move up, and when we have our mass battle, look at that, it's going to be 4 on 4, but our hero is going to add in his damage to the attack, and if he can do 10 or more, he'll eliminate an additional unit. Likewise, our wizard is going to move up here. He's protected. There's no line of sight. And he's going to try to back these guys off. He's decided that he's going to stand back here just behind our spearmen. See how safe he is? These guys can't charge him because these guys are in the way. The orcs will have to charge these guys. So our wizard casts his spell. This is where AD&D gets a little bit wonky because it is designed both for a dungeon where 1 inch on the table represents 10 feet, and 1 inch on the table represents 10 yards on the table. If this unit represents 4 orcs, the range remains the same. He is still at 4 inches. In a dungeon, he would be 40 feet away. Here in the wilderness, he is 40 yards away. What about the area of effect? If these are single figures, a spell which has an effect, if it's listed in the rules as 2 inches by 2 inches, that is 20 by 20 feet, it will have an effect of 20 by 20 feet on the table. But because we're in the wilderness, that 20 feet is not 2 inches, it's 2/3 of an inch. Wait, that would normally be, this is 10 yards or 30 feet, so yeah, 2/3 of an inch, which means that spell could still target all 4 of these guys. But it gets kind of exponential because if each of these guys represents 20 figures, now our wizard is not just taking out 4 guys, he's taking out 40. That's by design. That's a little bit of gamesmanship. Wizards are artillery. They're mobile artillery. They are very fragile. These guys, these crossbowmen are going to take him out. You better protect him. Because if you don't, he will drop a single web on this entire unit, and all 6 of these orcs will be eliminated from the battlefield for several turns while they're dealing with that webbing. It's okay. You can let your wizards be way more powerful when they've got the wide open skies. That is how exactly that happens. You can figure that out. You can justify it somehow or other. Oh, well, when you're down in a dungeon, the way they do it for arrow fire is archery needs an arch. You are having to do direct fire every time. Your range is going to be limited. It's dark, it's smoky, it's confusing. If you're using the mythic underworld, there is an overwhelming hostile presence pressing down on your every move. It's distracting. Your wizard's ability to tap into the Dweomic forces that allow him to unleash terrible spells is hindered. He's too far from the sun. I can name any one of a dozen explanations, but fundamentally, when it comes down to it, the real answer is this guy is allowed to do way more powerful things in a battle because that's awesome, and because the game is balanced for that, and because it just plain works. Hopefully today's video helps you as a non-wargamer understand how miniature war games work and how you can start to incorporate rules as written mass battles into your games. Of course, you need an excuse to bring 100 orcs and 120 soldiers onto a battlefield. And to do that, you're going to need to elevate your play. You're not going to be able to play day by day. You're going to have to include the other elements that support this kind of epic fight on your tabletop, such as one-to-one time and patron play. But that's a video for another video in the play. That's a story for another video in the playlist. Ha! That one almost got away from me, but I caught it and I dragged it back in. Man, I hope this helps. Till next time, I'm praying for you.